Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Profit Planning 60 Minutes to Forecasting Excellence. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program director at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the Nasdaq Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. Now we have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from the chat. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit those questions for our speakers at the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now, before we get started, I'm going to launch a couple of polls to take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of you are doing out there in our entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the first poll, how are you feeling about your business right now? Are you optimistic, in survival mode, or feeling a little anxious? We use this information to drive the wellness programs and additional support systems at the center for you, the entrepreneurs out there that we serve. So thank you for voting. I'm going to give this another second. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share those results. Looks like optimism is at the top of the key, but a little bit of anxiety and fear or survival mode out there. So hopefully our presentation will help with that. The second poll I'm going to launch is what's keeping you up at night? Is it finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? We also use this information to drive the future programs in the coming months. So let us know. And it looks like finance is in the lead, which is our topic of discussion today. So that's good news for our speakers. All right, I'm going to end this poll, share those results. Looks like finance is at the top of the key, but followed by sales, marketing, scale. So we'll make sure to make a note of that and to hopefully help. But good news is that our topic today is finance. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our host, Ronald Millsap, the director of the U.S. Zero to Barriers to Business at BMO. Ronald, welcome.
How are you doing this morning, Colin? How is everybody else doing? I get really excited about these opportunities that we have. I really like the in-person, but I like the virtual as well from the standpoint that we can draw in large audiences across the U.S. and Canada and other markets. So just to be able to pull in, have folks come here together, learn more about our unique partnership that we have with Arena. So BMO was really proud to be involved with Arena, going back to the Women FinTech program where CEO Heather Tawasin was able to participate and be mentored by the head of business banking in the U.S., Neve Christofek. And then the development of this partnership allows us to partner with NASDAQ, bring this curated education. So in my job, I get the unique opportunity to work with over 1,000 retail branches, a really dedicated staff of over 9 folks that I lead every day. And our goal every day is to make a difference for the businesses that we serve. So I think about this audience, I think about the businesses, and my goal ultimately here today is that you get exposure to Arena, that you learn about the fractional CFO services that they offer. 50% of businesses are going to fail within 5 years. 90% of businesses don't have a financial forecast. And Arena is right there to help you, to support you so you don't fall into those type of statistics. And I'm really excited to be joined here today by 2 fractional CFOs that currently work with Arena, but have combined 50 years experience. Mike Breeze, as well as Rusty Fette. They're going to lead us today in a webinar to talk about, now last time we talked about the importance of a financial forecast. Rusty and Mike are going to show you how to go about building it. And just for you guys actually registering for today's webinar that we're doing, you're all going to be entered to win up to 3 months of free CFO services with Arena. We're going to have 10 folks today that will win this opportunity. If you ever thought about doing it, Thank you for registering. You may just be that individual that gets selected and gets the opportunity to run the rails of Arena, work with one of their fractional CFOs, and lead your business to success. With nothing more, I just want to go ahead now, turn it over to Rusty and Mike. Please turn your cameras on.
All right. Well, hopefully y'all can see me. I'm Mike Bress. Rusty can introduce himself as well. We've been doing this fractional CFO gig for a little while. I've worked with probably for over the last, more years than I can say, or I'd like to say, with a lot of entrepreneurs. And again, forecasting is one of the biggest things that I recommend for people to do. So let's jump right in. Just to set your expectations. We have some slides, right? Of course, everybody's got to have slides, but we've also kind of put together some financial models as a starting point, some templates that Rusty's going to kind of dig into, kind of show you some of the ins and outs. So it's a little bit of education in slides and then some kind of practical. Again, it's tough to get all of the tips and tricks that Rusty and I have learned over the years, but we'll try to give you a couple things. So with that, let me start sharing my screen.
I guess before you jump in, Mike.
Oh yeah.
That model is going to be available for you guys to download just as soon as we wrap. I'm Rusty Fette, by the way. Really, really pleased to walk you guys through this. Mike and I are going to be handing off back and forth. So Ben, without further ado.
And we'll assume that technology works. So
That's right.
60 minutes to forecasting action. So let me what is a financial forecast? Of course, financial forecast is a projection of kind of revenues and future revenues and expenses. One of the key things I always tell my clients, this is an art. And also, it's the best thing that you can do at a point in time, right? I think people hear forecasting and they think that there's some magic around it. And it really is taking a look at what you think is going to happen. And it's the financial representation of that. If you think, a lot of people were optimistic this morning. Well, if you think that that this is going to be a good year, it basically is your ability to say, okay, what do I think that year is going to look like? And then it represents in numbers, right? Forecast isn't a big thing. It really just is a numerical representation of what you think is going to happen. 3 general forecasting methods, right? And I forecast a lot, and a lot of times it's a combination of these 3 methods in one thing. But I think as we think about forecasting, 3 high-level kind of categories, if you will. One is what I call a top-down, using kind of growth rates, right? So listen, 2023, my revenue was $100,000. I think that's going to grow 15% in 2024. So that means your revenue for 2024 is $115,000. Top-down using growth rates is quick and easy to implement. It does assume that your financials are largely comparable. So if 2023 was a good year and you think that kind of profitability and kind of performance and spending is going to continue, top-down using growth rates is a really good method. There's less ability for insight into why things are different, right? So that is one of the downsides to it. So the next one, top-down by unit of sales. So those of you that are selling things that you can price, this is sometimes a good way to do it, because if you think, okay, well, I sold 100 last year, this year I'm going to sell 150. It gives you the ability to take a look at what's the benefit of price changes? What benefit do I get from price changes? And then the financials more directly tie to your ability to sell or your desires and expectations around selling. And there's more detail for future planning. I'm a finance nerd, so for me is that if I can get to the most granular level of data, I'm in heaven, right? If I can use every row and column in Excel, that's ideal for me. Not all for everybody, but anyway, so top down by unit sales. Bottoms up, and this is, you can kind of see the progression of complexity kind of increasing up to the right, is where you can go line by line in your P&L, right? And say, okay, well, I think that my insurance costs last year were X. My agent is telling me that they're going to go up by 5%. Okay, let me reflect that. And then you build up your forecast from the bottom up. It requires more effort, right? And more detail. In some cases, larger organizations might benefit more from this, because then you can take a look at, look back and understand why. So let me dig a little bit into each. So let top down using growth rates, right? And this, then I'm going to turn it over to Rusty to kind of dig through this, kind of the top down using growth rates model that we have. In a lot of cases, it uses historical results, right? So if you have last year, I generated this much in revenue, you can apply a growth rate to that. So that's really the baseline of it, is how do we use historical results to look forward. And those historical results can be the last quarter, they can be the last year, they can be the last month, whatever you think is a good proxy for what it's going to look like going forward. The other thing that using growth rates you can do is you can say, well, I think my revenue is going to grow 15%, but I'm going to manage my operational costs to flat. Right. And so then what it'll do is you'll be able to see the expansion of profitability over that period. Or you think that you can figure out a better way to generate that your cost, kind of drive expenses, your cost of goods sold down. You can reflect that too by different growth rates. It's, top down using growth rates is a really quick and easy way to say, okay, well, let's look at what I think is going to happen. Anyway, with that, I will stop sharing and I'm going to turn over to Rusty to kind of dig into Excel.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. All right. So we're looking at our top-down percentage view. So this is a great place to start. Like sometimes even when you're wanting to go more detailed, like starting with top-down can be really useful, because just within a handful of minutes, you can get consensus, you can get kind of energy and excitement, you can get clarity on what goals and success can look like, both in terms of overall top line growth, that's revenue growth, and also profitability, like depending on how you're structured. So we're looking at this first line here, revenue. So the percentage growth, you can see we're forecasting over 5 years, and we're starting with $1,000, $1 million, $1 billion, just depending on how big we are, right? And this year, we're forecasting a 25% growth over the 1,000, gives us 1,250. Like if we think that we've been growing at 25% and that's not exciting, or it's not what we're aspirationally looking for in our company, like we think that our investment plans, our market opportunity, a new product we're bringing online, something is going to give us an opportunity to drive that, we might be plugging in something higher than that. We might also be looking towards the end of this forecast and knowing that we want to be a certain size at that date. And so if we're looking 5 years out and we're seeing like 5 times the size we were last year, almost, like that might be really exciting. That might be like, wow, that is like an aspirational goal that we're absolutely excited to rally around. Or like it might be like a stretch and we might feel like, that might not necessarily be realistic. And so what we see here is 25%, like let's say we want to be more conservative than that and say, we're going to look at 10% growth over the forecast period. You can see that compounds every year. What that means is every year you grow 10%, you get the 10% you're growing plus the 10% last year. So like it adds on top of each other, and we end up 60% bigger at the end of the forecast period. Editing that back out, the default assumption we made was we're actually accelerating. So if we started at 25% growth this year, like we think that we can continue to do a little bit better than that year after year after year. And like that 5% stretch adds up to quite a bit over time. And so that's how you use a percentage growth on revenue. For cost of goods sold, we've got kind of 2 ways we can look at this. One is looking at, so maybe just to define that first. So cost of goods sold, like that is what the things you sell cost your business. And if that costs you about half of your revenue, it might be less than that. Occasionally it's more than that, but let's just assume it's 50% for now. We can look at that assumption over time. If we think there's an opportunity to realize some efficient economies of scale, and as we get bigger, have more price negotiation room with our suppliers, for example, or like if we're in the services business, if we're able to get some scale out of labor arbitrage, hiring less expensive people who are earlier in their career, or maybe in lower cost areas of the country or the world. Those are some ways that you can get this lower over time. And so you can see here that we're ending up with a 40% at the end of our forecast, starting with the 50% with a few years of 45% in the middle. Another way you can use a percentage to look at cost of goods sold is, okay, if we started at 500, how much is that going to grow? And if we're growing our cost of goods sold slower than we're growing our revenue, which is the assumption we have here, then we're going to be getting more profitable on a gross margin basis as we go. And so you'll multiply that forward, and we end up with a higher gross margin at the end of the forecast than we did at the beginning. And you can see these two approaches have pretty different assumptions. We're going to be assuming option one for the rest of the model, but you can see, you can toggle these to whatever you want, and you end up with different results using, whatever your business's historical experience has been, kind of as your baseline. And like I generally advise clients not to go too far outside of that. In terms of operating expenses, we're also taking that percentage of revenue approach. So if we know that sales and marketing generally cost us about 25% of revenue, unless we understand we're doing something differently, like using that as a baseline assumption, which just means like that's where we're starting. And unless we're going to be intentionally doing something different, having a similar assumption usually makes sense. I don't like to have a lot of magical thinking in which the results are really different than the strategy in forecasting. And so you can see here, we're not assuming that these percentages change. And so like our net margin increases, but that's as a result of the increases in our cost of goods sold, like the favorable decrease in COGS as a percentage of revenue. So that is how we use a top-down percentage basis. Mike, did you want to walk us through top-down unit?
I will do that. May I share my screen? Oh, you want to unshare and I'll share mine.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So that, that's, again, like I said, that's easiest. I hate to say easiest, but that's the most kind of basic forecasting is kind of what we just went through. One of the next one that we talked about was kind of the top down by unit of sales. So a lot of people will say, well, I can more accurately reflect how many units, whether it's hours, whether it's widgets, whatever, over the next year. So what this does, top down by unit of sales, allows us to leverage an expected sales plan, particularly if you have a salesperson that you're incenting or that has a good sales plan. This is where you can leverage that in order to come up with what's the financial performance that comes from executing on that sales plan. You can change prices, right? So maybe there's seasonality where you actually want to lower prices in order to generate more revenue or more sales. And it allows you to take a look at the unit dynamics of the business as things change. Ultimately, unit cost is one of those really important metrics to look at, to try to understand as my business grows, how do my units and the cost of those units grow, because that directly relates to profitability. So I'll turn it back over again. I'm just reading this bunch of slides. Rusty's doing all the work on the Excel spreadsheet. So turn it back over to him.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, so tab number 2. As Mike mentioned, like this is a great place to go, particularly when you know that like what you're selling is a transactional sale. So if you have a subscription business model, that works a little bit differently. Some of these concepts apply to that as well. But if you are selling physical things, if you're selling one-time services, you know how much you charge in terms of the price, you know how many units of transaction or number of customers or number of customer transactions you have, and doing multiplication, price times quantity equals revenue. That's a great way to be a little bit more granular. And it's also a great way to understand what you need to do in order to realize a top-down approach. So like these things can be combined. So you might say like, we want to be growing 50% year over year, and like doing the math, I'm like, okay, well, that means we either have to charge this much more per unit or sell this many more units, or a combination of the two. And so you can use it as kind of like a drill down approach where you start at the higher level and then you start to get more prescriptive about what you need to do with your sales motion in order to realize those growth goals. And so here we're again starting at 1,000. That's $100 price 10 units. You can see here, we don't have a increase in price built in. If we wanted to change that, we could build in a 5% price increase every year and just plug that in like that. Ooh, not 1,000-something percent. And so that's one way to grow the business, is by increasing your prices in an era of lots of inflation. We experience this. We may have done this in our business. We also know that changing prices can be something customers are really sensitive to. And so when you do raise prices, sometimes you know that you might experience some customer loss. And so, like a lot of businesses are hesitant to bank too much on increasing prices. Like generally, your product needs to get better, or like if we're talking about an average price across multiple products, we might need to be adding more to our menu, selling more, selling something new in order to justify that price increase. And so the other piece we have layered in here is an increase in how much we're selling. And so we've got 50% more every year leading up to 30, at which point we plateau, but we could just change that to 40 and see another big change year over year. Cost of goods sold, I'm recommending a similar approach to our top-down percentage. Actually, that's not true. So what do things cost? Like this, the unit costs here work out the same, but we're saying for $100 of revenue, that's going to cost us per unit $50. So if we're selling 10 units, that's $500, $500,000 in cost of goods sold, and we're holding that constant. We can make the same assumption we did in our top down and decrease this over time. That would increase our gross margin profitability. But for the sake of this example, we're just going to hold that constant. Similarly, with top down unit costs, our operation expenses, typically we want to look at a historical average. So you can see over here, I've just, for the sake of showing you the formulas on the right, put in a monthly view. You just as easily, I in fact usually recommend forecasting at the monthly level of detail. This summary annual view is a great place to start, and it's augmented by getting more nuanced about what you expect to do, particularly within the present year. So if we're talking 2024, forecasting at the monthly level of detail is a really good idea. So in terms of predicting our sales and marketing, you can see these formulas over here reference the actual monthly costs, either in the most recent 3, the most recent 6, or the whole 12 months of 2023. And you're going to know your business better than me. To the extent we're new and looking at this data for the first time, making a conservative assumption, meaning we're going to pick, to the extent that these costs vary month over month, we're going to pick a higher average. So in this case, for sales and marketing, our 3-month average was higher. That might be because we hired more salespeople at the end of the year. And so if we know we're not planning on hiring more salespeople this year, that can be a really good way to forecast cost. And so you take your historical average, you multiply it by 12, and that's the way you forecast operating expenses using historical averages from a top-down unit perspective. Back to you, Mike.
Cool. All right. Let's talk about bottoms up. I'll admit, this is my favorite, but that's, again, finance nerd. One of the things that I want to say, and also just piggybacking on something that Rusty said, is we've given, but when we built this this model for y'all to use, we did it by years, right? So we did a 5-year forecast. A couple things I would say is that, as Rusty alluded to, you can do it monthly, right? I mean, really, it's the functionality and is basically the same to open and include months. Of course, growth rates, you're not going to have a 15% growth rate by month necessarily. So that is one thing that I would say. So we've tried to make it so it's pretty easy to copy formulas forward and use it by month. Of course, as most of you probably know, is that 5-year forecast is a longer term forecast. A 1-year forecast is really a budget, right? So this is actually a tool that can help you if you break it out into monthly to set a budget, right? Just to set a target and expectations for a board if you have a board, or for other investors who've invested money into it. Anyway, so let's look at bottoms up. Bottoms up is really the most granular view, right? It takes basically every line item in your P&L, and it looks at expectations, and allows you to take a look at what do I think is going to happen in each of these different line items: insurance costs, payroll costs, what am I going to spend on office supplies, what am I going to spend on Microsoft subscriptions, things like that, at whatever level of granularity you think is relevant, right? You can go all the way. I've had clients go all the way to the nth level of detail, which is great in terms of level of detail, but sometimes you got to be careful about losing the forest for the trees, right? One of the things I like about the bottoms up is that you can actually use it to forecast future decisions a little bit more easily. I'll go back to insurance. Well, if you have an insurance set of policies currently, but you're thinking of adding cyber insurance 6 months down the road, you can actually go ahead and incorporate that expense to see what's going to happen, right? So you can say, well, in August, I'm going to go in cyber insurance policy. It's going to be another couple thousand per year. Let's add that in and see what happens. The other thing is that what I like about the bottoms up is that it allows you to maybe, I'm a big believer in rolling forecasting. And what that means is you set a forecast, and when you have new information, whether that's monthly, whether that's quarterly, you reforecast, right? And so you can actually take a look at how reality compared to your expectations, and maybe make changes going forward. So if the last quarter you thought you were going to sell X, but you sold Y, well, does that change what your sales plan should be going forward? The bottoms up allows you, is a little bit easier to be able to do that kind of work. Of course, it requires a lot more effort and detail to implement, but I do think that there's a lot of value to it. But so really is the trade-off that you all have to decide for your business. Is going at that level, is that going to be helpful, or is it going to be just too much noise and too much effort for where you think you are in your stage of growth? So there's a lot to bottoms up. It really is. It is almost at the line item detail. One other thing that I would say, and I think I allude to it maybe in the next slide when we get back from Rusty, is forecasting can use a combination of these methods, right? There isn't you have to use top down by growth. It is, well, maybe growing my revenue by 1% is the best thing because I really don't know, but I know what my payroll costs are going to be. So you can do that at a kind of a bottoms up level. Let me turn it back over to Rusty. He can kind of share with you the models that we put together for the bottoms up perspective.
Perfect. So when we think bottoms up from a revenue perspective, I like to think about investing in my business. So I think we all know that growth usually isn't passive, it's active. You have to do something in order to get different results. And so like in this case, we're thinking about how much are we investing into sales and marketing, or sales or marketing, depending on your business. You might have both, you might have one, you might have the other. And so if we know that for every $250,000 we put in to sales and marketing, we get more than that back out, we can use that ratio to predict future investments. So like if we know that we're able to put in this case, going down here, another $95,000 into sales and marketing, we're going to have a return on that investment and grow at 34% in 2024. And so like depending on your business, these ratios might be different. You're going to know your go-to-market strategy, the way you think about finding new customers, selling more to existing customers. And so like what those numbers are for your business is going to vary business to business. Cost of goods sold works very similarly to the top-down unit approach that we just looked at. So I'm going to spend less time on that. In terms of operating expenses, as Mike alluded, like if you think about, like if you have an accounting system and you're used to looking at your profit and loss statement, you've got a whole bunch of different things on your profit and loss. And so you may or may not be organizing them in this same way, but most businesses have sales and marketing costs. And so that might be things like advertising. It might be things like if we're paying dedicated sellers, what do their salaries look like? We might be investing in market and research or travel for our traveling salespeople. There might be some support, some tooling. Those are just some examples. Similarly, there's going to be detailed costs for product and development to the extent that that's part of your business. And every business has general administrative, which is, if you have an office supplies, your rent, salaries and wages is usually the biggest one. And so what do those assumptions look like as you're growing? Most businesses give wages. Like to the extent you're growing revenue, you're likely going to have to be hiring. And so what are the assumptions you make? And so here our forward-looking assumptions are the product of this detailed kind of line by line review. And you can even be more detailed than this. Like that you're talking about hiring, like it's very common to see like at the role level of detail, here's the role, here's when I'm going to hire them, here's how much I'm going to pay them, here's if they're a seller, how long it's going to take them to get to productive. And so those are just some of the ways you can take something that is more detailed like this and start to get even more complicated. Back to you, Mike.
All right, we're coming down the home stretch, y'all. Then we'll open up for questions, which I think is where there'll be a lot of good interaction. So final consideration. So we kind of walked through these three different kind of methods. It's a combination, but we'll have this tool available for you all to use to edit and all that kind of thing. One final consideration, although probably two or three. A forecast that you develop is your best guess at what's going to happen in your business at a point in time. I like to tell my clients, and this is kind of because I'm a little bit of a smart ass, that if you come up with a forecast today, I guarantee it will be wrong tomorrow. Not because of that you don't know what your business is doing, but because the situation changes, right? And so one of the most important things for me in forecasting is set a forecast at a point in time where you get the most value, right? Is to say, okay, well, 3 months from now, I thought X was going to happen, but Y happened. And the most important thing with forecasting is trying to understand why happened, and does that impact decisions that you're going to make. Again, a forecast is really your ability to say, here's what I think is going to happen, but as time passes, how can I make decisions on the fly with some financial information that will change the outcomes, right? That will allow you to be more successful as your business grows. That really is, for me, the most important thing of a forecast or a budget even, is how do you go back and look at what you thought was going to happen, but now it's different. Right. So I think that's one of the really important things about a forecast is being able to go back. And kind of a caveat of that is one of the things that a forecast, particularly as we've built here and as we do with our other clients, is the ability to do scenarios. Right. So again, we can all say that the last couple years, the economic situation has been really volatile. But it allows you to say, well, a good forecast allows you to say, well, what if my revenue doubled versus the 10% growth that I assumed? What does that do? Because then that gives you resources and expectations with things that you can do to reinvest in the business. The other thing, again, forecasting is, really, really important for you to help manage and plan your business, I think. But, kind of with a nod to Ron, again, one of the big things that bankers will ask for, as you're thinking about financing options, is a look into what you think is going to happen. And so having a forecast, even if it's your best guess at a point in time, will allow you to be able to tell bankers, hey, this is a good business, give me some credit so that I can actually finance my growth. Anyway, with that said, I think that's, again, this has been admittedly a high level view. We provided some details, some advice, and some kind of tools to use to build the forecast. I think, next, I think here we've got some additional resources. Clearly there's a lot on the BMO site, arenacfo.com. There's information there about forecasts, as well as, places where you can, if you scroll down the bottom of our page, there's an inquiry kind of location for you to send questions if you have any. Anyway, I think with that, I'll go ahead, stop sharing the presentation, and we'll get out of the PowerPoint mode, and we'll kind of turn it over for questions. So, Colin.
Awesome. Well, Mike and Rusty, that was an amazing overview. And people have been super active in the chat. So if you haven't already thought of your question and dropped it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, please do so, because we have two experts here and we're going to pick their brains. Well, the first question we've got here is, any advice for which model you like the best for service-based businesses other than product?
Rusty, maybe we'll tag team. You want to? I'll take one, and then you take one. So because I'm a
Sure.
chatter. So I'll
Yeah, I can take that one.
Okay,
So
you want to
for
take that one?
services,
Sure.
yeah, for services-based businesses, the answer is it depends. Like if this is your first time doing a forecast and your business is simple rather than very complex, and you've got limited time, limited resources, I would start with the second one. I would think about like, okay, how much on average am I charging for my services, and how many units of service have I sold last year? And then what assumptions do I want to layer on top of last year for this year in order to get more nuanced? To the extent you've done this before or your business is really complex, I think bottoms up is a great investment. And like really, I love what Mike was saying about like, this is all forecasts are always wrong. I say the same thing to my clients, and it's an investment in learning. So like view it as like I am having a thoughtful exercise to make assumptions at a point in time, and I'm either going to win, which very rarely happens to you hit the nail on the head, especially the first time you do it, but you always learn. You learn about the assumptions you're making, like what went into that. You get consensus to the extent you've got multiple people you're working with. And so like all of that can help your services-based business, really get a lot out of the exercise.
Awesome. It looks like you're nodding, Mike. So
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely everything Rusty said, I totally agree with.
great. And just to dive a little bit deeper into that same question, how should a service business calculate COG or COS?
That's an interesting question, and frankly, I've actually had the same argument with the same person that came up with a different answer. So ultimately, in the service business, a lot of it's people, right? And investors, particularly if kind of more of like a tech company, they want gross margin, gross profit, revenue less cost of goods sold is a very important metric for them. But they always want to try to squeeze that as much as possible because that shows the health of the business. The best way to do it, and I start, the absolute best way to do it is to manage and measure the time that people are spending directly on the service that you're providing, not the kind of customer support, but if you're providing consulting services, right? So here's the time that I'm spending doing work directly for a client. That's cost of goods sold. Backup training and things like that, that's not cost of goods sold. So generally in a services business, a lot of labor. And so you want to actually figure out what labor is directly related to providing client service. And the rest of it really is kind of below the line operating expense. There's no easy way. A lot of cases I've done rough allocations, right? So I'll say, okay, well, half of Mike's time was spent with a client. So then I'll take 50% of my payroll costs, and that will be 50% what I put up in cost of goods sold versus what I recognize as kind of more general and administrative expense.
Solid advice. Rusty, anything to add? I know it's kind of a gray area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we're talking services, we're talking about people delivering services to people. So if we're the Mario Brothers, we're plumbers. Like it's how much time your plumbers are spending in the field versus doing billing. So like it's like the actual time spent like in service of your customers. Like as Mike said, it doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to do a time study. Like if you estimate that 60% and you think that's right because you used to do it, that's probably good enough.
Great. Let's see. We have another question from Tamika. Thanks, Tamika. They have been in business and busy over 5 years and never practiced forecasting and want to start now. So should they just start with last year's financials or use all 5 years to start actuals column?
You want to take it first? You want me to take it?
Yeah. So I would say, again, like that depends. Like to the extent there's been lots of growth and it's gone like this. So like last year might be much more representative of like all of the things you want to be investing in, like all of the customers you have. And your first 2 or 3 years might look like, you might have been 10% the size you are now. And so like in a scenario where that's the case, like looking at last year and building from last year, that would make a lot of sense. Like if it's more like, like you bought somebody's business, it isn't growing a lot, but it's really profitable, and all 5 years are more similar than they are different, like looking at all five and like looking at differences is what's been happening in the economy, what impact did COVID make? Like that's going to be a big exception in the middle of those 5 years that everyone should think about. So that would be a scenario where looking further back makes more sense. Almost always your most recent experience is your most relevant experience. So you should almost always weight that most heavily, unless you're going to know your business. And if there's a really good reason not to, you're going to know that as well.
And I piggyback on that to say as well that there's nothing that says that you got to do 5 years, right? That if you're just starting, right, it's kind of like, you're in elementary school and you're just learning how to do things, right? And just do a year, do a monthly view, just to be able to get into the practice of it, right? And start, again, there's no need to become an expert immediately, right? All you're trying to do is give yourself a sense of what your business will look like. So, a pretty basic, just a year, just to get you a sense of how do I do this? How do I think ahead? And how do I look back and make changes?
Awesome. That's great advice. And it sounds like saving time by not looking that far back too. But I love the most recent is most relevant comment too. That's great. Let's see. Another question here. What time of the year do you usually prepare your forecasts, and how often do you adjust?
Oh, that's a great question. And, again, as Rusty would probably say, it depends. I think generally, I think the way that people tend to look at it is at the end of the year, kind of December or January, you're kind of taking a look at the coming year and you're setting a budget. That's generally when I see it happen. But for me, is that I do think as you get more practiced at it, doing it more frequently is better. Just because a forecast is as good as the latest information you have. So if you do a forecast in December of 2023, but if you're making decisions using that forecast in September of 2024, there's probably a lot has changed. So I usually counsel, if you have the time and you get into the practice of it, to reforecast at least every 6 months. If you can get it, I have some clients where I reforecast monthly, not in a complicated way, because you can do it where it's just, let me take a look at what changed, what the historical averages changed, and that allows you to take a look at it going forward. So more frequent is better if you're going to use the information to change how you run your business. That's what I would say.
Sound advice. Let's see. Another question here. Do you have advice for pre-revenue startups that need to make a forecast for investors? You mentioned being conservative, but any advice on how to be conservative without devaluing your business potential?
Absolutely. So the way you want to do this is like you want to be really grounded in data that your investors are going to be able to look like and like feel like you've got credible reasons, like how big your market is, what's your total addressable market. You understand how much that market is growing, and you've got ambitious plans with strategies to back them up to not just grow with the market, but take a slice of the pie. You've got a value proposition, you're differentiated, and you are growing and you're taking share from your competitors in a market that's attractive in terms of size, in terms of growth rates. So you've got really good fundamentals. You got a plan to back you up. You are showing them how you're allocating their resources and the return on investment they're getting. And you want that to be attractive enough that they're going to write the check.
Yeah, pre-revenue companies, right? The investors are going to invest in you, not based on your forecast necessarily. They're going to invest in you based on the promise of what you're building. right? I think the expense forecast is important because you have to demonstrate to them, because they're going to have some kind of ownership and control, that you can be responsible in your spending. But ultimately, the investors, the coming up with a TAM is what they call it, total addressable market, that Rusty mentioned. That's a really important thing, to be able to say, hey, here's what I think it's going to be.
Yeah, at least the line of sight to cash in the bank for that investor. Let's see, another just broad question. So feel free to tackle either one of you. Who usually helps small businesses with forecasting? I have a bookkeeper and a CPA, or should I do them myself? Or should you outsource them to either one of those people?
I think I'll take a first shot. Of course, Arena CFO, but I would say more importantly, I think a bookkeeper is really good. I joke with people that bookkeepers are great and are absolutely critical. They're really good at looking and saying where you are, right? I think a CPA is starting to, has more experience in looking forward, right? Because it's a little bit of a different skill. And also a CPA, again, or a bookkeeper is very good at saying, here's what the financial statements look like. You're probably much better positioned to understand the dynamics of your business as they grow, right? And so I'd say it's a combination, but generally it's your business and what you think the market's going to be. That's probably something initially that you should take more ownership of, because the bookkeeper and CPA can give you inputs, but they're not necessarily going to help guide you around, what's my pricing strategy? What's my hiring strategy going forward?
Yeah, to build on that, the most important thing for most businesses is really knowing your customers, like knowing how you sell, what that means, like what works, what doesn't, what you can do in terms of making investments to get returns on those investments. And your CPA and your bookkeeper, they're not in that world. And so what they can give you is really sound, accurate historical information, so you can understand particularly your cost structure. And so they can be really helpful on the expense side. But in terms of revenue and really understanding growth, my experience as business owners typically have mastery over that in a way that their finance and accounting people within those two roles tend to be less deep in.
I think that's great advice. We're bouncing around here, but I think this is a good question. How to be confident when showcasing a forecasting model to investors about a new startup when everything is uncertain and the economy and volatility and our consumer behavior. And also to build on that one, what if you don't meet the forecast goal?
Wow, so those are two very different questions. So let me take a shot and then I'll turn it over to Rusty. I think ultimately at a pre-revenue early stage startup stage, an investor they kind of believe the financials, but they also realize that all entrepreneurs will, add some fluff to the forecast, right? They're always going to be optimistic because you're selling, you want them to invest because whatever you're doing is going to change the world. So generally, I think recognizing that this is your best estimate, but really selling the product side of it, right? As to why is this product something that you, Mr. Investor, you should be investing in, right? That's the most important thing. What I tell people is if you put a forecast together, this is your best estimate and you're the expert in your forecast, right? So an investor isn't going to be able to say, well, I don't believe those financials or that forecast, because you're the expert, you're the best person who's positioned to be able to say that this is what I think it's going to look like. They're ultimately investors, particularly early stage, are really looking at you to say, are you confident in the business that you're building and that you can execute if they give you $1 million, right? So I think the confidence really is knowing that you're the expert in the room. Yeah, investors, they've done a lot of stuff, but you're the expert.
I love that. And then
so I could build on that. So it's like,
oh yeah, go for it.
The answer is confidence. Like it's confidence that isn't bluster. It's confidence born out of I've done my homework, right? Here's numbers with footnotes, citing resources that are credible. Like I know what I'm talking about because I've done my research. Like I've done the math and I'm presenting you with ranges or scenarios.
Right.
And so like it's a no BS reality-based kind of thing. And one of the questions in here on the entry was pivot. Like investors know that the business model they see isn't the business model they're going to get 90+% of the time. So like what you need to do is like show them that you're thoughtful, show them you've got a great team, and like really like show like the way we did this is the way we will do that. And so big part they're investing in you and like how you think about it, the people you surround you with, and your vision. And to the extent you've got a track record, your track record.
I love that. Confident, cautious optimism. We just coined it. And then what if you don't make those goals on your forecast?
I think generally, in my experience, well, I've got multiple experiences, some good, some bad. I think generally the investors realize that this is your best estimate. I think for me, what I would say is you're talking to investors, board members, et cetera, communicate. Right, because the worst thing is for you to get a year down the road and they have expectations that you're going to do really great, and all of a sudden for some market dynamic you're not doing great. The worst thing you can do is come back and say, hey, by the way, we completely missed. So a little bit of it is a conversation. They'll generally force the conversation over a quarterly basis, right? What's going on with the business? Missing your forecast, it depends on the investor. But generally, I think investors understand that an early stage business, it's your best guess, but the situation will change. I think they're more interested in how you're going to respond when that happens. Communicate it and then talk about what your plans are to change the trajectory. If you go and you say, yeah, we totally missed sales and I have no idea what I'm going to do about it, that's not going to engender confidence. If you said, well, we missed on sales, but here's X, Y, Z that we're going to do in order to change the trajectory of sales, that's a great answer. Even if you miss the forecast, they're more interested in knowing that you are running the business and you know what's happening with the business.
That's well said, Mike.
Yeah. Let's see, you talked a little bit about pivoting, which is the reality of many businesses these days. So one of our attendees is the process of pivoting from B2C to B2B and offering a new service to a new sector. Phew. Any recommendations on how we structure all of this, or at least where we start when it comes to the financial projection?
Well, I can tell you that, like how you go to market is really different. And one of the realities about B2C is, I guess I can't assume that it's a tech company, but B2C can be very expensive to scale. Like you're trying to reach such a broad market. It's hard to use any marketing channel to really like do that super well. It takes lots and lots of money. So one of the reasons to go B2C and in order to go up market in B2B is like you can hire salespeople and pay them money and you can understand those economics. You can build that sales motion and you can get predictable returns on the quota you set. Get that money back, go hire the next salesperson, and you can keep doing it again and again and again. And so like one of the reasons people love selling to businesses, like to the extent you've got something you can sell on an ongoing basis, that's great. It's sticky. You can measure that. And so like those are all reasons to do this. If you're thinking about doing this, how you think about doing it, it's mostly about shifting from marketing to sales. And to the extent you've got a sales leader, like really picking that person's brain about hiring, about quota, about ramping up a new person, about developing your go-to-market strategy and aligning that in the rows and columns in Excel to get your forecast.
Very well said.
Yep. Nailed it. And then she agrees. She said, yes, so hard to scale B2C, Rusty.
B2C is tough because, again, you're using YouTube, TikTok, whatever to be able to touch a consumer. B2B is easier, or, it's more directly controllable, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can find salespeople and incent salespeople.
Yep. There's another question in a similar vein that says, how do you measure return on investment and forecast for marketing efforts, like on campaigns, content, influencers? I'm guessing this is in the B2B lane or B2C lane.
So I wish that I could say that here's the answer, right? Ultimately it's a little bit of a, I used to work for Capital One, right? Sorry, BMO, right? So we're very analytical, right? So you'd send out a campaign and you knew what people were coming back for separate campaigns that you sent. Much easier to do an ROI in that situation because you have the data. Generally, smaller businesses like y'all, you don't have access to that data. So it's a little bit of a judgment call. Some of it is, okay, well, I'm going to spend $10,000 on, whatever the marketing campaign is, and you can look at maybe the differences in sales over the following 3 to 6 months, and you can use that as a proxy for the value of that marketing campaign. But without a lot of data, it's more difficult. Google has helped a lot because I think that you can actually see Google Words, you can buy Google Words, what you're spending on that, and you can see how many people are coming to your website, using that word as a search. But a lot of it is, again, forecasting is an art, and it is what information do you need to feel comfortable with the decision. And in that case, it's not perfect, but if you can get a good sense of, okay, if I send this marketing campaign to this group of people, I'm getting this kind of return. That gives you a sense of, okay, well, here's what I would get by doing that to another similar group of people.
Yeah, it's great advice.
If I could build on that, I think
Yeah.
the most important thing, I usually say this to other finance professionals, is like, first you have to understand what kind of marketing you're doing. It's direct marketing, which is like you getting paper in the mail, and the people who send you paper in the mail or in your email or Facebook, whatever, Google, like that works because for every dollar they put in, they get more than $1 out on average. And so if you're in that business of direct marketing, then and you should be measuring. If you're in brand marketing, which is like billboards, right? That's like, you just want people to understand who you are, what you do, and like impact them more on an emotional level rather than making a pitch that's trying to convert a sale with this, the marketing collateral you receive. Then you should be measuring in a more of like a soft brand perception that you're going to understand generally, like people knowing who you are, particularly if you're at more a local level. Like being known is like how you eventually get referrals, but trying to really get too concrete on like the dollar return on investment tends not to make as much sense as just knowing that putting that awareness increase out into the universe is going to be good for your business, and you can invest more year after year and be conservative. And as long as you're growing and you can look at the percentage that you're investing compared to the percentage in growth and say, yep, I'm not unsustainable, I'm not upside down. That's generally how I encourage clients to look at it.
Amazing. Well, if we're almost at time, but I would love to get just a key takeaway from each one of you in rapid fire style. Mike, forecasting, key takeaway.
I'm sorry.
Just do it at whatever level you want to do it. Forecast, and you'll get better over time. There's no perfect way. Don't let the perfect be the enemy. The good enough to make good business decisions.
Awesome, Rusty.
Yeah, so I would say do it with your team to the extent you're more than an army of one, bringing people along the journey so they understand the business, they understand their role in the business, they understand how everything you're doing comes together in the financial scorecard, which is the measuring stick for the business most of the time. That's going to be hugely valuable.
Awesome. Well, Mike and Rusty, I owe my good friend Ronald over at BMO a favor because you guys did a really good job today on making this super simple and easy, and hopefully everyone on the call now has a better idea of how they forecast a profit. So Mike and Rusty and Ronald, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll follow up with more information, more resources, and upcoming courses soon. So
Awesome.
Keep a lookout for that. The arena, BMO resources, all those things will come in our follow-up email. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Awesome. Thank you for the time.
See you guys.